I always thought there was a certain charm to mundane tasks, a simplicity that grounded me. That's why a routine trip to the grocery store on a chilly Thursday evening felt like a reprieve from the complexities of my life. I meandered through the aisles, my list in hand, lost in thought until a voice from my past brought me sharply back to reality. "Isabella? Is that you?" I turned, coming face to face with a ghost from my high school days, Nathan Turner. He was almost exactly as I remembered him, tall, with that same unruly mop of hair, though now he had a hint of stubble framing his jaw. Nathan had been quiet, almost invisible, blending into the background of our adolescent dramas. Yet, standing before me, he seemed different, his eyes holding an intensity one didn't recall from our youth. "Wow, Nathan, it's been ages," I said, mustering a polite smile. "How have you been?" His response was a torrent of words, a flood of memories and updates about his life that felt oddly rehearsed. I listened, nodding along, but a part of me was eager to return to the solace of my shopping. When the conversation finally waned, I excused myself, citing a freezer full of melting ice cream. He offered a tight smile, his eyes lingering on me a moment too long as I turned away. That should have been the end of it, a chance encounter, brief and inconsequential. But as the days passed, Nathan's presence became a shadow that loomed over my life. It began with friend requests across all my social media platforms, each accompanied by messages that ranged from nostalgic to unnervingly personal. I declined them, unsettled by his persistence, but the rejection only seemed to fuel his obsession. The messages grew more frequent, their content darker, sprinkled with details about my daily life that he couldn't possibly know unless he was watching me. My trips to the grocery store, the late nights at the office, even my morning jogs, Nathan documented them all, his texts a chilling narration of my routines. I blocked him, hoping to sever the connection, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. Letters began to appear in my mailbox, each one more desperate and delusional than the last, declarations of love tangled with threats of what might happen if I continued to ignore him. The police were sympathetic but clear, without a direct threat to my safety, their hands were tied. I felt a scream of frustration bubble up within me, the injustice of my situation a bitter pill to swallow. I was a prisoner in my own life, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. One evening, as I returned home from work, the sense of being watched crept over me, a cold hand sliding down my spine. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest as I fumbled for my keys. That's when I heard his voice, soft and menacing in the darkness. "Isabella, why are you running from me?" "I just want to talk." I spun around, coming face to face with Nathan. He stepped out from the shadows, the streetlight casting his face in a sinister glow. His eyes were wild, a madness lurking within their depths that sent a shiver of fear through me. I backed away, my voice a whisper of terror. "Stay away from me, Nathan. I'm calling the police." His laugh was a sound that curdled my blood, devoid of any warmth. "They won't help you, Isabella. It's just you and me now, just like it was always meant to be." I ran then, my feet pounding against the pavement, Nathan's footsteps a constant echo behind me. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away, to escape the nightmare that my life had become. The chase seemed to last an eternity, but eventually, I found myself at the doorstep of a friend's house, pounding on the door with shaking hands. She let me in, her eyes wide with concern as I collapsed into her arms, my body racked with sobs. I stayed with her that night, the first time in weeks I felt safe enough to close my eyes. But even then, sleep eluded me, Nathan's face haunting my dreams, his obsession a dark cloud that threatened to consume me. The following day, armed with my friend's unwavering support, I went to the police again, this time with evidence of Nathan's stalking. They took me seriously, launching an investigation that revealed the depth of his delusion. Nathan was arrested, his apartment a shrine to his obsession with me, the walls covered in photos and notes that chronicled every moment of my life since that chance encounter at the grocery store. In the end, Nathan was charged and placed under a restraining order, the legal system finally offering me the protection I so desperately needed. But the scars of that experience linger, a constant reminder of the terror I felt. I've learned to be cautious, to guard my privacy fiercely, but the fear never truly leaves. It lingers in the back of my mind, a shadow that flits across my thoughts when I least expect it. I've moved on, my life a series of new routines and safety measures, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I find myself wondering about the darkness that lurks in the hearts of those we think we know. Nathan was just a man, a former classmate, but within him resided a horror that was all too real, a reminder that true terror doesn't come from the monsters under our beds, but from the obsessions that consume the human soul. The bell above the deli store would chime, a quaint sound that usually heralded the entrance of regulars, neighbors grabbing their lunch or dinner. That day, it announced her first visit, a moment that would unknowingly mark the beginning of my descent into a nightmare. She introduced herself as Eliza, a new exchange student from Europe, her accent a melodic contrast to the mundane chatter of the deli. She was charming, with a smile that seemed to light up the dreary space between the cold cuts and the stale bread. Her interest in me seemed innocent at first, a simple curiosity about my studies and life in America. I was flattered, to be honest. Working the cash register at a local deli wasn't exactly the peak of excitement, and her attention was a welcome distraction from the monotony of my days. Eliza began to visit the deli daily, always timing her visits to my shifts. Our conversations grew longer, her questions more personal. I told myself it was just friendly banter, the kind of harmless interaction that made the days go by faster. But as the weeks passed, her demeanor shifted, her light-hearted questions probing deeper, her visits more about seeing me than buying anything. It was flattering at first, her interest. But flattery soon turned into unease as her presence became a constant in my life. She found out where I lived, sending small gifts and letters that went from sweet to unsettling. "I feel like I've known you forever," one read, her handwriting a delicate script that contrasted sharply with the chill it sent down my spine. I tried to distance myself, to set boundaries, but Eliza didn't take kindly to rejection. Her demeanor turned cold, her eyes no longer sparkling with interest but something darker, more obsessive. She began to show up at my classes, always lurking at the back, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that bordered on fanaticism. The breaking point came one evening as I closed the deli. The bell chimed, a sound I had come to dread, and I knew without looking up that it was her. Eliza's visits had escalated from daily nuisances to menacing encounters, her once charming smile now a harbinger of my growing fear. "I just want to be with you," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Why won't you let me be a part of your life?" I tried to reason with her, to explain that her obsession was unhealthy, that we couldn't be together in the way she wanted. But my words seemed to fuel her anger, her affection twisting into something sinister. That night, I found my apartment ransacked, pictures of us from the deli, pictures I didn't even know existed, plastered across my walls with a note pinned in the center, "We are meant to be." I reported her to the police, but without solid evidence of her breaking and entering, they could do little. I felt helpless, trapped in a situation that seemed to escalate with each passing day. My once simple life had become a horror story, and I was the unwitting protagonist. I decided to confront her, to end this madness once and for all. We met at the deli after hours, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. Eliza was already there, waiting for me, a calmness to her that belied the storm I knew was coming. "I love you," she began, her voice steady. "And I know you love me too. You're just too scared to admit it." I denied it, tried to make her see reason, but it was like speaking to a void. Her delusion was impenetrable, her obsession a fortress from which there was no escape. It was then that she revealed the depth of her madness, pulling a knife from her coat, the blade glinting in the dim light of the deli. "If I can't have you, no one can," she said, her voice a chilling resolve. The ensuing struggle was a blur of fear and adrenaline. I managed to disarm her, the knife clattering to the floor, but not before she left a mark, a deep gash across my arm, a permanent reminder of our encounter. Eliza was institutionalized, deemed a danger to herself and others. Her family flew in from Europe, their apologies a hollow echo of my ongoing nightmare. I quit my job at the deli, moved away from the neighborhood, and tried to rebuild my life in a new city, far from the memories of Eliza and her deadly obsession. But even now, years later, I find myself looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. The trauma of that experience has left scars deeper than the one on my arm. I've learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones cloaked in human skin, their obsessions a twisted love that knows no bounds. I thought working at the deli was just a means to an end, a way to make up for tuition. I never imagined it would become the setting of my own personal horror story, a tale of love turned lethal. Eliza's face still haunts my dreams, a ghost from a past I can never fully escape, a reminder of the fragility of sanity and the dark depths to which the human heart can sink. Skipping school had become our little ritual, a way to escape the monotony of high school life and assert some control over our days. There were 5 of us, a band of misfits bound by our disdain for authority and a shared love for the adrenaline rush of breaking rules. Our sanctuary was a nearby deli, an inconspicuous place that became our haven from the prying eyes of truancy officers and concerned parents. The deli's owner, Mr. Jacobs, was a gruff man with a heart of gold, turning a blind eye to our truancy in exchange for our patronage and the occasional help with stocking shelves. It was an unspoken agreement, one that benefited all parties involved. That day started like any other, with laughter and the thrill of playing hooky. We settled into our usual booth, the one at the back with a view of the entire deli, our laughter echoing in the small space. It was in the midst of our revelry that they entered, 3 men with masks concealing their faces and guns glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. The air froze, our laughter dying on our lips as the weight of the situation settled over us. Mr. Jacobs, ever the protector, tried to reason with them, but his words were met with violence, a blow to the head that sent him sprawling to the floor. Panic set in as the men began to ransack the store, their movements frenzied and desperate. We huddled together, our booth a flimsy barrier between us and the chaos unfolding just meters away. It was then that one of the robbers spotted us, his eyes lighting up with a malicious glee. "Looks like we got ourselves an audience," he sneered, gesturing to his companions. They advanced towards us, their intentions clear in their menacing strides. We were trapped, like rats in a cage, with nowhere to run. In a split-second decision, we dove under the table, our bodies pressed tightly together as we tried to make ourselves as small as possible. The footsteps grew closer, the sound of our breathing deafening in the silence that followed. It was Lisa they grabbed first, her scream piercing the air as they dragged her from our hiding spot. The terror in her eyes was a mirror of my own, a reflection of the nightmare we had found ourselves in. I don't know what came over me, but as they pulled her away, something primal took hold. I lunged at the nearest robber, my actions fueled by fear and desperation. A scuffle ensued, a chaotic dance of limbs and shouts that ended with a gunshot ringing out, loud and final in the confines of the deli. Silence fell, a heavy, oppressive thing that seemed to squeeze the air from my lungs. Lisa was released, her sobbing form collapsing back into our booth as the robbers fled, leaving behind a trail of destruction and the lingering smell of gunpowder. Mr. Jacobs lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. The reality of what had happened, of what we had witnessed, set in with a crushing finality. We had come so close to death, saved only by the reckless courage of youth and the misfiring of a gun. The police arrived minutes later, their questions a blur as we tried to piece together the events that had transpired. The deli, once a place of refuge, was now a crime scene, the remnants of our innocence shattered among the broken glass and spilled food. We were hailed as heroes in the aftermath, our actions credited with saving Lisa and potentially stopping the robbers from causing more harm. But the title felt hollow, a poor consolation for the trauma we had experienced. The deli closed after that day, Mr. Jacobs succumbing to his injuries and a stark reminder of the cost of our truancy. We attended his funeral in silence, our guilt a heavy shroud that no amount of praise could lift. High school resumed, our days filled with the whispered rumors and sideways glances of our peers. But we were changed, the bond between us now forged in blood and terror. We no longer sought the thrill of breaking rules, the taste of danger now bitter in our mouths. Lisa withdrew, her vibrant personality dimmed by the shadows of that day. We tried to reach out, to bridge the gap that had formed between us, but some wounds are too deep to heal. I graduated high school with a sense of relief, eager to leave behind the memories and start anew. But the events of that day followed me, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that lurks in the hearts of men. The deli, now an empty shell, stands as a monument to our lost innocence, a place where joy and laughter were replaced by screams and gunfire. We were just kids, seeking a reprieve from the pressures of adolescence, but we found ourselves in a horror story, one that I relive every time I close my eyes. In the end, our sanctuary became our prison, a place where our lives were irrevocably altered. We had sought freedom but found only chaos and violence. And though we escaped with our lives, we left behind a piece of ourselves, trapped forever in the moment when everything changed.